Hi, I'm Jonathan Leeman. Welcome to this episode of Pastoring in a Pandemic. It's a daily conversation I'm having with pastor friends of mine through the month of March. I think we're May. I think we're just going to do it a month of May. And today I have the pleasure of having a conversation with my friend Tim Challies. Tim, you might know from Challies.com. He is also a Canadian. He is also the pastor or one of the pastors at Grace Fellowship Church in Toronto, Canada. Thanks so much, Tim, for joining me.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
How's the internet biz?
How's the internet biz? Good, I guess.
Isn't that what you are? You're like internet biz guy. We all think of you as the internet guy.
I'm a blog guy and a blogger guy. So yeah, it's good. I don't know. I enjoy what I do. And I've been on the road a whole lot less than usual lately. So it's kind of been nice just to settle into my office here and get some writing done.
You're also a pastor or an elder at Grace Fellowship Church, as I said, and Paul Martin is the preaching pastor there. He's a good friend of ours. So thank you for the work you do there. Something I like to ask my guests, Tim, is because we're pretty low tech, low budget, is we can't have music in the background. We certainly can't get copyrights. But if we were to play walk-on music for you, entrance music, what would your entrance music be?
You'd probably just have to play "O Canada," don't you think? Just to punch it with like a good brass section or something. That would do me fine. Yeah.
Can you give us a couple bars of that? We need a couple bars of that.
No, I'm not going to. I don't sing. Yeah. Everyone knows "O Canada."
Can you hum it? Can you hum it? I don't know it.
When you go to a sports game here in Toronto, all the Torontonians sing your national anthem. Do you sing ours? When a Canadian team plays in the US, do you sing along?
Oh, no, I guess we don't. Feels kind of one way, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
Well, okay. Are you asking me to sing the Star Spangled Banner right now? Is that what you're getting at? You really
No,
want me to
I'm good.
That?
No, I'm not asking you to do any such thing. Yeah. It would just remind me too much of professional sports and just the deep pain we're all feeling that we can't sit back with the ball game in the evening.
Oh, I know. That's true. That's true. Well, since you're on the topic of Canadian conspiracies, do you like that transition?
Sure. Yeah.
About songs and national anthems. That's kind of what I want to talk to you about today. Is this question of conspiracy theories? I receive emails from pastors weekly, right? Different people asking me stuff, as well as just different pastoral groups I'm a part of. And something I've noticed is guys asking about the question of conspiracy theories. Now, I'll be honest, I'm not aware of any in my own church or people pursuing questions about conspiracy theories. Nonetheless, from what I can tell out there and the questions I'm hearing, that is a common topic. Why is that is that something you're hearing? I guess my first question, are you hearing a lot about that at the moment?
Yeah, I get tons of emails from all over, as you'd expect. And yeah, there's quite a lot of buzz going on about different conspiracy theories, people wondering what's true, what's not true, people looking for an evaluation of them and so on. And if you track blogs and stuff, you'll see quite a few people lately have written about conspiracy theories. If you scroll down and start reading the comments, you'll see that there's lots of people who are really dissatisfied with the mainstream explanations of what's going on right now and are looking for an alternate explanation.
Those comment sections get pretty hot. People take them pretty seriously.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, it's been very interesting. It's actually, maybe if you got a little bit of time, read through some of them and you'll just see there's a serious debate about what's actually happening right now. What is the reality behind the lockdowns and everything else? So there's a lot of talk about it. Yeah.
Can you give us a couple of examples of conspiracy theories that are popular right now?
Yeah, I don't know which ones are popular. You hear different ones bandied about, but certainly there's Bill Gates is at the center of a bunch of them. Some people would be saying that Bill Gates in some way was behind the creation or the releasing of this virus, either to depopulate the world or maybe to come through with a vaccine, something along those lines. And so there's a shadowy group of people behind the scenes who have worked to release this virus and harm humanity. Or another one would be the connection with 5G internet. You've probably heard of 5G towers burning. And so there are some people who are convinced that there's a tie between 5G and coronavirus and those two things somehow play together. So I think those would be well within the realm of what we'd call conspiracy theory.
Makes sense. Tim, define conspiracy theory for us. What makes a conspiracy theory,
Yeah,
quote unquote, a conspiracy theory?
sure. Well, one thing that's important to note is nobody says they believe in conspiracy theory. I don't
Of
think.
course not.
Everybody believes they believe in the truth. And so nobody would say, I'm a conspiracy theorist. They would say, I'm a truther or something like that. And so the debate is really over who is true, which of the explanations is true. I think it's really important to properly define conspiracy theory, because some of what people may consider conspiracy theory, really, I don't think it's fair to typify it that way. Um, you can come up with an explanation of the facts that's not exactly the same as what CNN says, or not exactly the same as Fox News says, or whatever, and that's not necessarily conspiracy theory. So a conspiracy theory, I think by definition, is an explanation of an event or an explanation of circumstances that's the result of a secret plot that's put together by powerful conspirators. And so it's something that's hidden from view. There's a secret plot behind the scenes by people who are more powerful than you or I. So those are the markers of a true conspiracy theory. And again, I want to distinguish between that and just looking out at the circumstances now and saying, I just don't think that the facts as I understand them line up with the decisions that have been made by politicians.
You said people are dissatisfied, Christians especially are dissatisfied with kind of, what did you say, kind of mainstream explanations. What's the mainstream explanation? That it's not all of this stuff behind the curtain. It's a lot more transparent. Unpack that just slightly.
Well, the mainstream interpretation of this event would be that a virus arose somewhere, I guess in China, in all likelihood, through wet markets or something along those lines. It organically arose. It was not released. Possibly, I think even within the realm of mainstream there is that it might have somehow escaped from a lab, and that people were examining this thing and maybe got contagious and carried it out. And then it just organically, as viruses do, spread across the world. And then the world responded by putting lockdown measures in place based on their best assessment of what to do in the moment, their best assessment of how this thing would spread, and so on. So I think that's a very mainstream understanding.
I was looking at a couple of things in preparation for this conversation, and one author remarked how they do have their particularly powerful form of mythology. They grip the imagination for a number of reasons. What are some of your thoughts on why Christians in particular are, inclined to latch onto some of these? Why are pastors struggling?
Yeah, and it does. Sure. Yeah. Well, I think pastors are struggling because they want to protect the unity and preserve the unity of their churches. And they understand right now people are scattered to the four winds or scattered around town, but this week or next week or in the coming weeks or months, they'll have to bring their church back together, and they'll have to respond to this thing. They'll have to put certain measures in place. Those measures will be very different if you buy into one narrative or you buy into another, or if you've gone fully out into the realm of conspiracy theory. So for pastors, someday the rubber's going to meet the road and they'll have to make some decisions. Are we going to socially distance within our churches? Or even if we do, am I going to let the congregation know, I don't really believe in this, I don't think this is true, but I'm doing this just so we can meet together and not face the force of law? And yeah, so I think pastors are the ones who at some level just have to determine how they'll respond, how they'll lead the church to responding. And so pastors want to know what's true, and they want to preserve the unity of their churches. You asked why Christians are very prone, or maybe particularly prone, to conspiracy theory. And if that's the case, I don't know how you would substantiate it, but if it is the case, I would think maybe a couple of reasons. One, we have an awareness that there are forces behind the scenes. There is more to this world than what we can see and what we can detect. We know there are demonic powers at play, and that they do influence the course of human events. And we know there are conspiracies. The question is whether these kinds of conspiracies really exist and whether they're the most likely explanation for events. And then also Christians, we have, maybe rightly so, a bit of a persecution complex, and that we always expect the world, the flesh, the devil are going to come after us. And so when we see things that harm the ability of the church to worship, I think one of our first thoughts is not people are trying to protect us, but people are trying to harm us. And so perhaps as part of our worldview, it's easier to believe the government's trying to do something evil toward us because they're not Christians or whatever the case may be, rather than to think they're operating out of love, they're being God's servant for our good in this moment.
Yeah, we know the principalities and powers at work. We see that government can have certain beastly trajectories. So the idea that something is going on isn't utterly crazy, right? We know that
Right.
forces are at play. That's a good point. Um, one article in the National Review by Andrew Studiford, he lists about 4 reasons. Number one, he says it satisfies humanity's hardwired need to find structure amidst apparent disorder. What's going on? I need an explanation. Makes sense, right? Number two, it throws up someone to blame, a prospect which has a certain allure. Oh, I get to oppose those people. I get to hate those people. Even that can be alluring. Third, he says it's not insignificant thrill that comes from the idea of having a role in a great drama. Our lives are born. And fourth, I found this one most interesting. He says it gives people the perception that they're in the know. It gives them a sense of superiority, that they know something that other people don't knowing, and let me invite you in and make you pay a fee, and then I'll let you know what's really going on here. And that's kind of appealing at certain levels to our flesh. Less theologically driven, a little bit more kind of what's going on in the heart there. I don't know if he's a Christian writer per se, but
yeah,
those make
Carl
sense to me.
Trueman. Yeah, Carl Trueman in another context has made the point that conspiracy theories make us feel important because we are so important that these shadowy behind the scene forces must be acting secretly to try and destroy us or to try and harm us. So in that sense, they can make us feel more significant than the reality, which is most of us are all of us in some way are totally insignificant to the course of world events. But if they're going to all this trouble, then it makes me feel like I must have some sort of a key to something. So there's a lot to think about. And again, I just want to carefully distinguish between conspiracy theorism and those other explanations. I think we need to keep drawing that distinction because there are different ways of looking at the events and saying, I don't believe that these facts quite add up. And that's well within the bounds. Every conspiracy theory deviates from the mainstream narrative, but not every deviation from the mainstream narrative is a conspiracy theory, if you want to put it that way.
Well said. Okay, so now you're having a conversation with somebody who believes and is convinced by and is even emotional about something that you think is a conspiracy theory. Maybe it's the Bill Gates thing. I don't know if I want to pick one thing and go down that road, but something that you're convinced is a conspiracy theory. How do you interact? How do you pastor that individual?
Yeah, well, with love, certainly, and not with fear or defensiveness. But I think if somebody believes in a conspiracy theory, it's likely the person believes in multiple conspiracy theories because I think it's more of a worldview than something that stands in isolation. So I think there's something more going on. There's just a certain way that person is, in all probability, looking at the world with a certain level of suspicion or a certain level of fear.
So you're the person who's bringing it up on something on coronavirus probably had certain ideas going on in the election in 2016 and probably had ideas going back at Y2K or any number of these things. So there's kind of a pattern. Is that what you're suggesting?
I would say in general, yeah, I would look for that pattern. And then I would want to address that differently. If this is a one-off and they just believe this, then maybe I would put a little more time into addressing it. But if this is kind of their worldview, it's very hard to disprove a whole worldview or to help coach somebody through that. The other thing is, by definition, you cannot disprove a conspiracy theory. How can you prove that these people do not exist? How can you prove that Bill Gates has not done this? So it's you can't really disprove it to anybody's satisfaction.
So saying that's ridiculous. Come on. Good strategy, not a good strategy.
I don't think I don't think it'll be an effective strategy, good or not. I don't think it's likely to change anybody. But what I think we need to be doing is calling people to love one another, because go to the point where the rubber meets the road, where now we as Christians who, if in the New Testament church, the church in the book of Acts and so on, the churches could get along, even though you had Jewish and Gentile believers who are coming together, some of those Jewish believers still holding to some elements of the Old Testament law, and Paul saying, hold to your conscience and love one another. I'm pretty sure there's room in our churches for us to love one another despite these kinds of disagreements. And so look for that place where the rubber meets the road and say, okay, what are we going to do in that moment? If there's some people in this church who are utterly convinced we ought to be wearing masks when we come back together, how are we going to speak to or speak about those who say, I don't need to wear a mask? Like, that's where the pastor is going to be pressed in that moment, in that situation.
It does occur to me, especially in the pastorals, a couple places in the New Testament, but I'm thinking of the pastorals where Paul tells Timothy to warn them against foolish controversies and endless genealogies. It is interesting to me that there's something like conspiracy theorists among the Gnostics and the mythologists and so forth in the New Testament. And there is a willingness to call those things out and say, stop it, right? Mm-hmm. How and when do we know when to say stop it? That's a foolish controversy. It may be a little harder to judge, but it does seem like there needs to be that category, right?
Yeah. I think if it's bringing division, right? If somebody's holding those things and doing so somewhat privately, that's his conviction based on his understanding of the facts, that's one thing. But if he's bringing that to church and now causing division, or if you look at it in matters of conscience, Paul would say, you who believe you should only eat vegetables, that's great. Keep holding to that conviction, but don't now judge your brother. Don't pass judgment on the others. And you who think you can eat meat, that's fine, but don't go chewing bacon in front of that other person just to flaunt your freedom. And so the controlling principle is how to love one another. If people are causing division, they're not loving one another. And now you've got a biblical category to say, I need you to love. You're sinning in this way. But as long as we're all working toward unity. Go ahead.
Yeah, okay. So I can respond something like, listen, I'm honestly not sure about the whole Bill Gates thing. I'm not going to try to argue you out of that. I am going to point to what I do know with certainty. And that is, you're called to love Bob, who fundamentally disagrees with you on Bill Gates. And maybe Bob is completely misled. That's possible. But I know, nonetheless, you're called to bear with him and love him amidst his confusion over this whole Bill Gates situation. And the Bible is calling us not to engage in foolish controversies over that, and to bear with one another amidst our disagreements on Bill Gates, this, that, or the other. Right? A fair strategy. Is that?
Yeah, it's an untested strategy. I don't think you or I have had to do that yet, but I expect
I've not had that conversation.
Yeah, I expect both of us will on some level, but we can always call people to love and to unity. These are key principles in the local church. And so there's no reason you need to win your brother to the conspiracy theory or away from it. In either case, that's not a necessary element of unity. You need to love one another. You need to bear with one another. And in all things, we're not called to make people exact clones of ourselves. People, in that matter of conscience, Paul could have said, you can eat meat. Jewish people, go ahead, eat meat. You don't need to celebrate the holy days and so on, Romans 14. But he didn't. He told them, if that's where your conscience directs, then hold that, but don't let it in any way infringe upon your ability to love others. And so again, I think there may be ways of addressing, if you're in foolish controversies and so on, then maybe that's a project for the pastor to address over time. But I don't think holding that means you cannot love others.
You said that you and I haven't had the conversation. I think we have had that conversation in other domains, whether we're talking about different political issues, maybe certain cultural, ethical decisions that one might make, whether or not you can see this movie or not see that movie, some of these Christian freedom controversy type things. And in that sense, it occurs to me that the conspiracy theory topic is similar to those other kinds of conversations and admit a similar pastoral response. Perhaps the difference is that they can tend to have a feverish grip on the imagination, right? And people become, in my experience, just here or there, they can become enthralled by them, and that's where it makes it particularly dangerous for the possibility of division, as you were saying, which is what we need to guard against. And I think you might have some concern about the person who spends their life, instead of thinking of the things of heaven, they're thinking of the things of earth and the principality and powers of the earth, when we know who has true lordship over all the principalities and powers. And so it occurs to me, finally, what we need to keep doing on this topic, as in others, is point people to the gospel and the fact that they're forgiven and that Christ has won a victory and that he is Lord over all. Right?
Yeah. I think that right there, pointing people to the sovereignty of God. I wonder if some of the alternate explanations arise from just a disbelief that this could actually be God's sovereign will, that our lives would be interrupted, that our wealth would be taken away, that our vocations would be, that all this progress I've made in life and vocation might be taken away. Like I think maybe it's easier to believe that a bad person did that than a good God did that, or a good God was behind it in his good, precious, kind sovereignty. So if we can stand firm on Romans 8:28, we can stand firm on the good promises of God, that he's working all things for our good. Then I don't think we need those explanations in the same way. We can just keep pointing people toward the goodness of our God.
Amen. Well said. And also, kind of one of the 9 Mark's theme verses is Ephesians 3:10. The wisdom of God is displayed to the principality. What's the phrase? To the powers in the heavenly places, principalities, powers in the heavenly places. As Jew and Gentile come together as one in the gospel, we display God's wisdom. In other words, we have an opportunity amidst conspiracy theories, amidst uncertainties about what caused this, in the unity that the church has, even as forces oppose us, whether they're behind the curtain or in front of the curtain. We have the opportunity to show a true trust in the sovereignty of God and in the lordship of Christ. And I think that's good news that we can be sharing with our church members and with other churches. So, any last comments on this topic?
The gospel's got to be strong enough. If it can bring together Jew and Gentile, it can bring together all these other divisions. And surely it's strong enough to bring together the truther and the sheeple, or whatever the varying terms are, where you can really believe that person is not seeing the world rightly on either way, but you can also believe that you really love that person, and that person is a child of the King, and you are called to love that person. And in fact, there's a special challenge in loving a person who sees the world so differently, being gentle with them, being patient with them, and just loving them as Christ does.
Tim, interesting and useful conversation. Thank you so much, brother. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.